Moment, guys. Hang in there, and hopefully everyone can hear me now. Okay, great. Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Jeff. So I'll go ahead and reintroduce this webinar. This is part 2 of the walkthrough of the pre-work at Origin Code Academy. The pre-work or prep course consists of 3 of our courses taken straight from the curriculum, and that includes Web 100, Node 100, and Web 101. As you can see, we're still here in the first module, Web 100, and this covers basic HTML and CSS that will get you building websites just at the bare minimum. And then as you move into Node, you learn a little bit more about JavaScript, and then you dive back into Web 101, which is more advanced HTML and CSS, and also some jQuery, which is a very cool code library that allows you to make cool animations on the web page, manipulate the web page using code more than just HTML and CSS. And you'll see if you stick around and come to the next few webinars, just the power of JavaScript and the jQuery library itself. It's actually quite fun. So hopefully we see you there in the next couple of videos. Today we'll be talking about CSS. Perhaps we'll finish the rest of these lessons if we make some progress. Unless any of you want to stop and spend some more time on a particular lesson, feel free to do that. And if you're actually working through the pre-work yourself and have a specific question, of course, throw that in there. Even if it's on a different, if it's in a future module, we can maybe address that. Just whatever questions you got, throw them in the chat channel, and I'll be monitoring that and be able to answer any questions that you have. So last week we were able to get through most of the HTML lessons, and we did all these code exercises together, which should have helped some of you out if you were just starting. And now we'll be continuing on and mostly dealing with CSS today. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And if you think of cascading like a waterfall from top to bottom, flows from top to bottom, that's how the browser interprets your web page. And so that's a little bit about the definition of CSS. And we'll see more how that works as we get into making CSS files and applying them to our HTML pages. So I went back, let's see, our progress, we left off on level 4 exercises, but I wanted to go back to the level 4 lesson, which is CSS Rules and Selectors, just to get a brief overview of what we're going through, and then we'll be able to dive into those challenges together, and I'll explain things along the way. And of course, any questions you have, go ahead and throw them in the chat channel, and I'd be happy to address them. So first, looks like we have an introduction to CSS. HTML is great, but HTML alone is plain and boring. It was the early days of the internet, very basic text only. Then came along cascading style sheets, a way to put color and style into our web pages. So like the difference between black and white and color TV. So that sounds exciting. Let's see. All CSS, if you're not going to have a separate CSS file, will go in between the style tags directly in your HTML document, as you can see here. And style rules go here. You can see this is what a style rule actually looks like. So you guys can obviously read through this yourself in more detail. I'll just kind of skim through some of these headings here. Selectors, we can select by several different, actually 2 different methods, the class or ID. Classes, as we learned in a previous lesson, are more for repeating elements on a page. If you're going to have multiple lists that are of the same class, then you would call them like a drink list if you had multiple drink lists. An ID is more specific, like if you had just one food list, you would say this is my one food list, so it has an ID of food list. And we can see some more of that as we get into the exercises themselves. But these couple of things will never change. To select by class, you use a period, and ID, use a hashtag. These are 2 very important concepts and something I use every day as an active web developer myself. So selecting by class and ID, very common, very useful. So that looks like about it for this lesson. Let's see what what we have ahead for us in the code challenges. So the instructions. We'll now place our CSS in the styles.css tab above the editor. So if we click on our styles.css, hit start, looks like we have nothing in our CSS file, but we do have some HTML here. So it looks like we're going to be applying some styles to this HTML document. What's it asking us to do? Create a rule using the body selector that sets the color property to blue. So the selector, besides using, let's go back to the lesson here, besides using the ID or class selector, HTML elements themselves can be selected with no special character. So in order to select the body, it's as simple as saying body and then opening the rule block, or opening the curly braces, as we like to call them. And setting the color is as easy as typing the word color, and then even the name of a color afterwards. There are a few colors that you can type directly into CSS, like blue. It looks like some options pop up for like blue, violet, red, green, green, yellow. Let's see if we've got any. Sea green, seashell, sienna, slate gray. So there's all kinds of cool colors that come kind of pre-populated in CSS, within CSS, that it interprets and turns into a hash code of its matching hash color. So let me just pull one in. Actually, let's look up the hex color for sea green. So CSS will know to take that word sea green and apply this hash color to it. It would be the same thing as saying sea green in here. So let's actually follow the instructions and set it to blue for right now and run our tests. Okay, so great. We set all of the color of our HTML document to be blue. And just for the heck of it, let's type sea green back in there, run the test, and we'll see that it didn't pass, but it did change our color to sea green. And so if anyone has any crazy colors they want to throw out there and see if it exists in CSS, let me know. Powder blue, pale green, pale turquoise, all kinds of interesting colors. But in order to satisfy the exit criteria, I'll have to go ahead and make it blue. So go ahead and test. Looks like our tests are passing. And we can move on to the next CSS exercise. So style CSS, hit start, our standard procedure, and it looks like this might be modifying the same document as the last one. So that's kind of cool. We can build onto our CSS rules and see how multiple rules affect the affect the HTML document. So now it's asking us to select all the P elements. Again, we don't need to use the ID or class selector because we're selecting all elements themselves. And these elements, some of them have a class name, but we're not worried about that yet. It's just asking us to select all P elements, regardless of their class or ID. And so, in order to do that, we just, for style, okay, it's asking us to write our code below. For style, it's nice to have a space in between for readability of your code. So again, setting the color is very simple. You just write the word color and as the property, and then the whatever color you want to set it to. In our case, we want to set it to red. So let's give that a test. Looks like it's passing, and all of our P or paragraph elements have now changed to red. And our titles have remained, or our headings have remained blue because we haven't overridden, or actually, the cascading nature of CSS will, the rules that appear below other rules will override the rules above them. So our P selector overrides our body selector. Let's move on to the next lesson. Create a new rule that targets all P elements in the body and sets the color to green without removing the previous rules. Okay. Hey, Christopher. How's it going, man? If you're just tuning in, this is part 2 of the webinar series for completing the Origin Code Academy prep courses, which are right now we're in Web 100, HTML and CSS basics. Feel free to jump in with any questions you've got or any knowledge if you have prior experience. Yeah, the chat section is all yours, guys. Feel free to go crazy and ask any questions that you have. Don't hold back. So right now we are dealing with CSS and selectors, and okay, Chris. Well, you are obviously ahead of this section. Do you mean the JavaScript section, by any chance? So this should be easy breezy for you. Maybe I'll ask you some questions. Test your knowledge. Or not. So to target all of the P elements that are within the body, we will use a specificity selector. And so we'll just say body space P, and that is just indicating that the P elements have to be within the body or this rule doesn't apply to them. Glad you're here, Chris. So you can get a little better at your CSS skills. It's I mean, the basics of CSS are pretty simple. There's a lot of crazy stuff you can get into with Sass and Less and a few other tools in the future, but for right now we're just getting a good review of the cascading nature of the CSS file and how it how the rules override each other as you add them. So to select all the paragraph elements within the body, here we go. And let's set the color to green and see what happens. All right. Looks like that worked. So now it looks like we have a few more tasks on our plate. Four bullet points for our exit criteria at the moment. And so let's work through them one by one. So create a new rule that uses the class selector blog post. All right, so we talked a little bit about class selectors and how they always use the period. The instructions were kind and gave us, kind of the rule itself right here. I'm just going to copy that and throw it in here. And let's look at the HTML file to kind of see what we're going to be manipulating. So let's look for blog-post somewhere in this file. Okay, great. So I see blog-post here, but I also see it here. But that has a -p after it. So this rule that we're applying to the blog post class will not apply to the blog post P class because they're completely separate. And the sorry, I just had a guest try to join me, but I guess he's got other places to go. All right, so the blog post selector, using that, we're going to set the padding to a value of 32 pixels. All right. And what padding is kind of a buffer around the HTML object itself. There's a few different buffers, you could say, the padding and margin. But the padding, if you think of the HTML elements as a box, the padding is the space around the element within that box, and the margin would be outside of that box. And so that might be confusing at the moment, but we'll kind of get an idea of how it works here when we run these tests. But let's finish going through the exit criteria. So using the same selector, set the color to the value. Here we see a hex color like we saw before when we looked up the sea green. So let's do a reverse search and see what color we can expect this to be. Hex and we'll just type this in. And there's many websites out there that will convert hex colors to real colors, and they should give us like a gradient kind of. Oh yeah, here we see. So looking for a name here. This one doesn't have a fancy name, but it looks like it's a shade of blue. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, it doesn't have a fancy name that I can see, but that's all right. All right, so in order to add multiple rules to the same selector, all you do is make sure you put your semicolon in there, and then just make a new line within these blocks. So it says to, navy blue. That's a great way to describe that. I'm not sure if you saw that on here, but I'd say there you go, navy blue. You nailed it. So let's set the color to our hex value for navy blue. I wonder if we can type in navy blue in here. Navy. Let's see if that gives us the same passing result or not. This will be an interesting test. Finally, it says that we should set the font family to the value Helvetica. So font family, Helvetica. Well, we got a few. Let's try just Helvetica. All right, so that should satisfy our exit criteria. Let's go ahead and try to test that and see if we get a passing result. And it looks like not quite, because it's expecting the actual hex value. So the test must be looking for, so now we get into the other way to define colors, which is RGB, or red, green, and blue values. These values can go up to 255 in each thing. So obviously the first number stands for red, how much saturation of red you want. The second one is how much green, and the third one is how much blue. So our navy has a nice mix of all three, but it's really looking for this really rich blue. If your computer doesn't have the font Helvetica, will this font change work? That's a great question. Since we're dealing with the web here, it's a little different. It doesn't need to be installed on your computer, and it should pick it up. CSS is pretty nifty in that way, in that it has a few built-in things. If you want to use more advanced fonts, for example, from Google Fonts, you'll have to include those in your HTML, which I can show you an example of here in a second. Let's get this part working, and actually I'll throw the hex value in there. Give it a test, and it looks like our tests are still not passing, so I wonder if it's expecting capital H. Okay, so the spelling is case sensitive here for the font families. So I put in a lowercase h, and the tests do not pass. However, when I change that to capital, boom, there we go. And let's see, it looks like Helvetica to me. Let's make sure we remove that. And I'm not sure if the font is actually changing. Let's see. Font family. All right, so we got those ones passing. I'll just go ahead and show you what I was going to show you from Google Fonts, which is just an easy way to get a few fonts. So let's look for something crazy. Let's just grab this bold one and grab this link here. So what I did was select a font that I thought was cool or stylish, and I click the Add button, and now it gives us this snippet of HTML actually that we can plug directly into our HTML file. And this will allow you to have all kinds of fonts, anything you can find online, without installing it on your computer or using Word or anything like back in the old days. So if we throw this link, which always goes in the head element, and then we tell, let's see, our font family to be, oops, Bolby one, here we go. So now it also has our CSS rule down here that we can just go ahead and copy and paste directly into our CSS and replace the Helvetica. And now our tests won't be passing. But let's see if it, yeah, so we got our new crazy font that we picked from Google Fonts. And just for the heck of it, I'll leave this open, and if anyone sees a font on here as I'm scrolling through, just shout it out. Maybe I can throw that in there. Maybe a cursive one like Butterfly Kids. A nice typewriter-esque Roboto Mano. Indie Flower, kind of like a play on Comic Sans. All right, well, hopefully everyone saw how that worked, and we'll just go ahead and change back to Helvetica in order to pass the tests. All right, moving on to the fifth and final code challenge for CSS selectors. And it brings us to the ID selector, which we talked a little bit about. We saw how the class selector works. Now let's see how the ID selector works. So looks like there's going to be an HTML element with the class or with the ID first blog post. Let's go ahead and hit start so our code gets populated. And then check out the first blog post. Okay, right here, ID of first blog post. So this means that there should not be any other HTML elements on the page with the same ID. That's just kind of the convention. It's possible that you could give the ID to multiple elements, but it's just very unconventional, and you will probably get confused if you have multiple elements with the same class name and multiple elements with the same ID name. So think of ID as your driver's license or your personal ID. There's only one of you. You know, you might have a doppelganger out there, but he's not you, doesn't have the same ID. There's only one. Classes are like school classes. You know what I mean? Everyone takes the same math class or something like that. You get the idea. Class, many, ID, single. All right. So let's select the ID of first blog post. I believe it was called first blog post. And we'll open up the rule blocks, and just like we did above, we'll set the background color this time to Chris. So it is similar to calling variables, somewhat similar, and I think you mean JavaScript, just not to confuse anyone. Let's see. But declaring variables is also possible in CSS using a different framework called Sass. So that's a little more advanced, but also something very useful to declare. So you could do something like this at the top at my blue equals, and then give it your own hash color. And then down here you could just say at MyBlue. So that's a good relation there, Chris. Thanks for chiming in. But for now, let's just go ahead and satisfy the exit criteria. It's asking me to put this below. I don't think it's going to matter, but just in case anyone out there is upset that I wasn't putting it below, there you go. All right, so let's test that, and bam. Looks like our background color, was it changed? Oh yeah, so there we go. You can see that our blog post 1, or first blog post, has a slightly different background color than the blog post 2, which makes it more readable, clear separation between the first and second blog post. All right, so congrats, we made it through CSS selectors. That's awesome. Get our little congratulations message, and now we can go ahead and move on to the next lesson. All right, looks like we'll be doing basic CSS styling. So CSS properties, those were like color and background color and padding, which we saw in the previous lesson. But we just saw 3. There's actually over 300 that you can modify. Probably about 20 to 50 that you'll be using on a regular basis, and then very edge cases where you deal with the, upper 75% of those properties. So similar to HTML tag names, you'll start to learn some essential ones, and you can always look up the rest online. So CSS Properties. One of my favorite resources is the W3 Schools. And this here we can see that I'll list in alphabetical order of just the huge number of CSS properties that we can modify. Let's go ahead and look for some of the common ones that we've been using. If we just look for color, there's a lot on the page apparently. But here's background color, which we saw. If we scroll down to the C's, there's the regular color that we saw. And then under P, padding. Okay, so there's the 3 out of hundreds that are available. Chris, to answer your question about using images on documents. So let's see if we can find that in one of our HTML lessons. Let's go back to HTML elements. Okay, great. Found that right here. So here's the actual code for displaying an image on your HTML page. And I don't think our current lesson is going to have any images, but I'm going to copy this snippet of code and keep it in there so that we can play around with some images later, if you'd like to see that, Chris. But image is one example of a void tag, meaning you don't have to use a closing tag. It's contained all in one tag with a closing angle bracket, a closing slash just before the closing angle bracket. So again, this is the basics of the code for displaying an image on a web page. Let's go back to where we left off and continue on with our CSS lessons. So do a brief overview. You guys can always read through this in the future. Looks like our markdown document is actually missing an image itself too. So this will be a good lesson. All right, so it talks about properties. Then we talk about measurements. We saw pixels used before. Another common way is EM, which actually stands for the letter M and what the size of one letter M would be on the web page itself. Background color is an example of a property. Width, height, we saw those in here. Height is right there. One of the hundreds of CSS properties you can modify. Introduction to the box model, which we talked about padding a little bit. Again, margin is outside of the box, padding is within the box. see if we can find a good picture of that, because that's actually so here we go. If you think of the actual HTML element on the page as a box, the content would be the text per se if it was a paragraph element. So like hello world would be in here. The height and width properties of CSS would modify the actual width and height of the content. The padding is just around the edge of the content. Border is around that. And then finally, we have our margin, which will push other HTML elements away from it, basically, the more you increase the margin. So hopefully we'll get to see some of that as we go through the next coding exercises. We'll go ahead and skip through the video. You can watch these after you sign up for the prep course and start going through this for yourself. Maybe we will take a quick aside and just show you how these Scrimba videos work. And actually, Christopher, this will tie into your question about displaying images on web pages. So for any of you out there who haven't used Scrimba before, I'll just give you a brief overview. This is a Scrimba video. Looks kind of like a normal video player. We can hit play, and you can hear there's a lesson being taught in the background, as well as some live code being typed out during the lesson. And so this is a great way to listen and learn and watch and actually see the code and the effects of the code when it's run in a browser. And then the very cool thing is you can pause the video at any time and jump in and update this code yourself and run the code and see your changes. So right now, let's change my website to our awesome webinar website. And if we refresh the browser, we can actually see that the title on the web page was changed. So this is a very cool tool. One of the best parts about this actual curriculum, this course itself, is the ability to learn, to watch and learn, and then be able to dive right in and get your hands on the code. So this is invaluable. It is a one-of-a-kind new tool that not many people have experienced yet, and it's truly a game changer in my opinion. And so we can see that the actual image tag here is displaying an image. That same image tag that we saw from before, that previous lesson we went back to. Okay, Christopher, go ahead and shoot. What you got? Let's change the... Christopher, that's a great question, and we will think about implementing that. That's not a bad idea. One suggestion I do have for that, if you really want to see the output of your code, I'll go ahead and show you. Go ahead and move to that. So if we're done with the video and think we've understood everything from the lesson, messed around with the code, and let's see. Oh yeah. So there's that image being displayed. If you're in the actual exercises, one cool thing you can do is use an outside tool called Codepen. Let's close that guy, close this guy, close that guy. All right, and this website Codepen is completely free. You have to sign up for an account, but you don't have to put a credit card or anything in, and it's a good way to just run HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you can take the actual contents and copy them from our index.html, create a new pen, and post it in here. And then any CSS that you write, you can also post it in here. And it actually automatically runs it for you, and you can see the output similar to the window in our Scrimba lessons. So several ways to go about that, but this is one way if you want to do some more messing around. Let's go ahead and back on to the coding challenges. All right. So using the article rule, set the color property to blue. We have seen this before several times. You guys should be familiar with the color property. It sets the color of any elements within our selector to be whatever color you selected, you tell it to. So let's run that test. Looks like it's passing. And let's move on to the next one. All right. So we are on 2 out of 7. All right, I was just checking to see if you could, if you make the window a little smaller, you can see the results without scrolling down, which might be helpful if you're having a problem scrolling down. I understand how that might be a little inconvenient, but just go ahead and resize it, and you should be able to see both in the same window. So let's go ahead and hit start. Looks like we'll be using the same article rule to set the font family to Helvetica. All right. Should be flying through these. All right, here we get a new property called font style. And this, as you can see, can be used to set the font to italic. I believe it can also be used to set it to bold, but let's give that a try. So if we try font style bold first. You know what, let's give that a quick search. The font style is actually not used to set it to bold. We would use what's called font weight. And now we can see that all the text has become bold. So let's set it to italic, and ba-bam. Our text is now italic, and we have passed all of our tests. All right. Remember, for any of you who are watching, that if this stuff interests you and you're like, wow, I can't wait to get my hands on some code, feel free to sign up for the prep program at prep.origincodeacademy.com/prep course sign up. Well, Christopher, that's a great question. To memorize all of HTML and CSS code probably can be done, but not if you want to fill your head with other languages and other more powerful programs like JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. To memorize 300 properties, I'd just say good luck. good luck memorizing all of that. Not super important. There's tons of resources out there. You can always just give it a quick, look up on W3 Schools or another resource that you find effective. So personally, I haven't memorized all of them, and I haven't met anyone who has, but I'm sure it can be done. So let's see how this text align property works when applied to our articles. It looks like now everything is shoved to the right. And we are getting to see a lot of new properties here. Next, we have text indent. Can any of you guess what this might do? All right. Looks like it indented the first line of both of our paragraphs, or article elements. Next, we'll be dealing with the font size property. And we'll set it to 100 pixels, which should be fairly large. Wow, there you go. You can see you have some very large text, and our solution is passing. All right, we've made it to the last exercise in the CSS Properties exercises. So let's go ahead and knock this one out and see what's next. We have about 13 minutes left. If anyone has anything specific that they'd like to see, then go ahead and let me know. I'm not sure if we'll get to the end of our whole module yet, but perhaps we can get through the next lesson, CSS Position. If you guys are interested, or if you have something else that you'd like to see, then go ahead and let me know. So both of these properties we have seen before. The font size, this time it's a reasonable size. It's not oversized, like 100 pixels. It's more of like font size 12 in Word, or 16. It's kind of similar to those measurements. So this time we'll do a reasonable 16 pixels. And then we'll set the padding, which we've seen, to 32 pixels. All right, so just for an example, let's take the padding out. And we can see that now there's no space between the edge of the browser and our content itself. So let's see what happens when we add the padding in there. Just take notice so now there's a nice border or like margin, but really it's padding of 32 pixels around our blog post. All right, we have successfully completed another module. Let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson about CSS positioning. Oh, and Chris, in the near future, will you be able to go back and redo the exercises? So that is a great request. And if you think that would be helpful, then we'll go ahead and throw that into the backlog of things to be done. If you reach out to Ned or Ryan or anyone at Oregon Code Academy and just follow up, and we'll see how that's going to go. First, we're going to be implementing more multiple choice quizzes alongside the exercises. So that's kind of first up, and then next we'll look at going back to the exercises. But for now, if you'd like to create an account at Codepen, then you can save all of the HTML and CSS and JavaScript from the previous exercises into their own pens, and you can always go back and reference them later. So that's one option. And then also just be on the lookout in the near future for being able to go back to those exercises right from within the portal. Right now, we kind of just want to get you through and get you onto the main curriculum as quick as possible. And so we're trying to just, keep your momentum up and get you through these first 3 courses quickly. So you can get into the fun stuff of building full stack web applications and using React and more front end frameworks and doing cool leading industry stuff that we teach here in the rest of our curriculum. These are kind of the basics. So our next lesson is on CSS Properties. And I actually might save this for next time. So I'll leave the last about 5 to 10 minutes for any questions that anyone's got. Go ahead and throw them in here and ask away. I will just, let's see, maybe I'll go ahead into the next exercises and I'll just mess around a little bit. Go ahead and throw any questions that you've got out there. Hey, Christopher, do you mean WordPress by any chance when you say WordPress? If so, WordPress kind of does a lot of the HTML and CSS and a lot of the coding for you, and it's more of a drag and drop interface with some like preset templates and all that. So I would say it's probably helpful to know what's going on behind the scenes, but you're not going to actually need any of this knowledge to create a great WordPress site. And the majority, I don't have much experience with WordPress myself, but I know they use PHP, and you can manipulate some of the code there. And so if you're familiar with that language, then. But as far as HTML and CSS, you're not going to be messing with a lot of that in WordPress. But it will be handy to know and probably help you understand what's going on behind the scenes a little more. Just going to play Russian roulette with these colors here. Bam. Medium orchid. All right. Let's see what we got. Bam. Beautiful. Thank you, Christopher, and thanks to everybody watching. That's going to conclude the part 2 of the OCA prep course walkthrough series. Join us next week for more on CSS, and hope to see you. Sign up for the prep course, and we'll hope to see you in there. There's always the Slack channel. Let's see if we can access that really quick. Actually, just open it up here. And all the students who are going through the pre-work can just throw their questions in here. Some ask me directly. Let's see. And you can get help this way. Or you can wait until the next webinar and tune in then and fire any questions you got at us. So again, if you're interested and think you can hack the whole coding and web development lifestyle, then join us at prep.origincodeacademy.com/prep course sign up and see how quickly you can get through these first 3 courses and get you into the main curriculum and building really cool web apps. And Chris, if you don't have access to the Slack channel, you can go ahead and you'll have to sign up for the pre-work first, and you should receive an email with a link inviting you to the Slack channel. All right, Chris, just one moment, and let me go ahead and post the link in this chat channel so that you can go ahead and sign up. All right, let me know if you're able to join that way, and we'll get you in there. All right, thanks, Christopher, and thank you, everybody, again. Tune in next week for more on CSS. See you next time.